Hi guys, welcome along to Design Technology TV. Today we're going to be furthering our series on the NEA for OCR. We are looking at feasibility, which is the first aspect of Strand 1, so 1.1. Within this, there's a series of different aspects that you need to undertake as students. You'll help you to set up your NEA and undertake a project that's worthwhile and correct for you and suitable for the things that you are capable of doing. It also will set the standards of the aspects that you expect to complete by the time you then finish the project. So the feasibility will run the whole way through. Within this presentation, we'll talk about good ways of doing it, bad ways of doing it, and some fundamental principles, including how the project is marked at this stage. To begin with, what you're going to do is you want at least 3 projects. So you can have more than that, but there are 3 projects that you need to look at. We'll look at the mark scheme and understand why that's important in a bit. What you're going to do is you need to find problems or products and then think about them in their context of use, why they're important, what's the need for those products, which is why they're going to be a viable problem, i.e. something that needs to be resolved. We then go through into proof, and what you're going to do is you're going to put together a range of different information from different sources that prove that this project is actually needed. From that, we then undertake some SWOT analysis, which is quite a simple form and quite a fast way of analysing the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats for your products and projects. And then finally, we're going to more detailed feasibility study for your best and strongest ideas. So there's a series of slides that all marry together and work their way towards what will ultimately become your design brief. We're not going to get onto design brief today because that's not part of this. That comes later once you've worked out which is your best project and what things are required within it. So the mark scheme itself, as you'll already be aware, the mark schemes are broken into different bands. So mark band 1 through till 5, and then within the mark scheme there are a series of different statements. So this is the first statement, 1.1. Here specifically we're looking at investigations, and I'm not going to read the whole thing out. Fundamentally, the EU border tends to sit down at the bottom of mark band 2, and the A border tends to sit at the top of mark band 4, sorry. As such, all of you should be aiming to push yourself up into mark band 4. There are issues associated with students trying to reach exceptional, which is obviously mark band 5. Exceptional is exactly that. It is exceptional. It's not expected. If everyone got exceptional, it would be normal. So therefore, it can't be exceptional. So don't panic if you're not getting into the exceptional level, but you should all be aiming to get into mark band 4. What we'll do is we'll have a quick look at some of the language here to make sure that you're understanding what it is that you need to do. So if we look at mark band 1 first of all, we're talking about superficial investigations. So that means stuff that doesn't have a lot of detail in it, that it's quite cursory, very top level, kind of surface level rather. It's just looking at possibilities of what can happen, but in a very, very basic way. We then look at sufficient, so it's starting to put some understanding together. It's starting to show that you understand the reasons behind it. We then have good level. So a good level means that a third party, such as myself when I mark it, or the moderation team, can look at it and understand fully where you're going. Comprehensive, that's now making sure that it's got quite a lot of detail in it, and it's starting to really kind of flesh out all the reasoning behind why you're doing the project you're doing. And then exceptional then is obviously exceptional, which then pushes the boundaries further, and it means you cover basically everything. You'll notice that it talks about identifying problems, even in mark band 1, and then further as it goes through, it talks about investigations and problems. With that in mind, you can undertake a single project in the feasibility section and only cover a single project. The problem with that is that to get the higher mark band marks, it has to be epically good. The quality, the detail, the depth, the perceptive communication has to be incredibly high level, because you are not doing challenge, you're not doing problems, and you're not doing investigations, which means it has to be incredibly high. As such, undertaking 3 or more other projects ideas and looking at them in some detail opens up the higher marks without having to go into as much detail on a single project. So I always uh, suggest that you go through and do at least three. Four is an option. So three or four problems or products. We also, as we go through this, need to be considering the market potential. So is your product actually marketable? Is it something that people want? Or is it just something that you perceive as being an issue that needs to be solved? And actually, in real life, no one would really want it. So the marketing comes into this, and we should be referring to the marketability of the product throughout this section, showing that there is a marketable need for it, and it's not just a single kind of person, a person's need on their own, like your perception that one particular problem is an issue, everyone will buy it, and the reality is you find it mildly annoying and no one would ever buy it because it's a bit of a pointless product. Within the section, what we're looking for is that you will include some, probably most of these things, not necessarily all of them. First of all, potential stakeholders and users. You will contact those people. So at this stage, what you're doing fundamentally is focusing towards a user. We've discussed the difference between users and stakeholders before, so you know the differences. We will talk a little bit more about stakeholders once we get into 1.3, which is regarding the stakeholders' needs for the product. But at this stage, understanding what potential stakeholders might want from the project, but fundamentally what a user will want from the project, is really important. So the user, if there aren't enough users, then you're not going to have much of a marketable product. How are the users going to interact with this? What do they want from your project? At this stage, opening up questions and not necessarily having answers to them is completely appropriate. The best projects here have an interview with the user right at the very start for possibly one or all of the potential projects, who is someone that will use the product in real life and can fully engage. Now, the user can cause a few issues for people. For instance, if you're doing a project, an architectural project, for instance, you may, a user of a building is just somebody who lives possibly in the house. That in itself can be problematic if they don't know much about buildings, or if the building isn't being used in a particularly specialized way. Therefore, you might then towards using a stakeholder such as a builder or a carpenter, or somebody who is within the industry manufacturing the product, because they will be using the product as they put it together. The other option is if you're doing a project, so for instance, a refugee shelter or something like that, that's fine. But contacting and then discussing the issues with the people that will actually use it can be quite difficult. So sometimes you have to use people who know something about it or could use it, and they play the role of the user. It doesn't necessarily have to be the person that's going to use it, depending on the project. However, the closer you can get to discussing this with a real person who's really going to use the product in real life, the easier and better your life will be, because they will make more perceptive comments, they will give you more information that is relevant to the project, and make sure that you stay on track. Ideally, this user that you speak to will then follow through the whole project. So having someone that you've got regular contact to is really useful. Although the user can change, or they can expand. You can have more than one user. So don't panic about it, but ideally at this stage you should be having conversations with the user about using the product, what they want from it, how it's going to work. You may also include mind maps. Sometimes those can be a bit pointless because they don't really get you very far and aren't very perceptive. Mood boards, again, just giving a sort of general feel for the project. It's quite a useful way to get started, but isn't really worth very many marks. Visiting places, i.e. going somewhere and seeing the problem happening, is very useful. So that visit, could be nominally a visit to your garden, and then you look at a project or a product or a problem that's happening within your garden scenario, and you're actually there. It might be that you've got to go to a museum, a stables, a building site, etc., etc. But it can really help you to understand what's going on. Interviews, as I said already, with users, but potentially with stakeholders as well, i.e. people that specialist stakeholders are very useful, people who understand specifically what's going to go into a product. Observations, i.e. you watching something happening, identifying problems and seeing that things are either going well or not. Again, there's an issue with bias in that, and it's also your opinion, so be careful with the information you get from those. Surveying, actually giving surveys to people. The problem with this is that routinely you've got a very small sample size. That means that the data you get is very statistically skewed and not always very useful. So be wary of it. Focus groups, again, getting a group of people to discuss the problem can be very useful. But again, if you've got one very loud voice within a group of 3 or 4 people, they can have a real sway on the outcome. So be mindful of the information you're getting from these kinds of research. Feasibility study, well, I recommend you all have some SWOT analysis. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. That's going to be covered in a separate video, which will be on Design Technology TV, so have a watch of that. Fundamentally, these are very quick ways of identifying core principles within your project and working out whether it's good or bad. So I suggest you have one of those for every single project that you look at, so 3 or 4. However, what you'll find is that quite often, even if the projects are massively different, that the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats often fall into similar categories and often have quite similar components within them. Because of that, they're not completely reliable, they're not massively in depth, but they are quite a useful starting point and to help you get your mind around it. So we can start with those. You will also include photographic and video evidence where you're actually proving that the problem really exists. So finding information from websites, newspaper articles, magazines, YouTube videos, discussions with users, all those sort of things. And what you're doing is you're stitching together and proving that the problem really exists. Fundamentally, one of the errors that students make, and I've already mentioned it, but it's a big one and one that you need to get right, is that students perceive that there's an issue with something. They say, right, this product fails because it doesn't do this, therefore that needs to be solved. And the issue then that crops up is that either there's already tons of products on the market that already do that and fill that gap. So what's the point? What's your project going to do that's different and unusual and better? Or what they do is they perceive that there's a problem, but actually it's a very localized problem, either to them and a couple of mates, and that's it. And in reality, no one would actually ever want the product, no one would ever use the product, no one would ever engage with it. And that's then makes it so that it's not marketable. So you may find, in terms of finding proof, that you find an article that's useful but doesn't specifically say what you need it to say. What you can then do is you can stitch together several different articles and pull out quotes from those articles or figures or numbers and facts, and then stitch those things together to make your own narrative, i.e. you can say this is the problem and here's the proof, and it comes from this source, this source, this source, these couple of sentences from here and this bit of video here. Those things put together create the problem I'm referring to. So you can be fairly creative and use a range of different sources to make sure that there is the proof that you need. Often, the mistakes that are made. Students don't involve a user right at the start. It's going to hammer your marks through the entire NEA project if you don't, and it's really fundamental to the whole thing, so make sure you do. Get them involved as early as the feasibility study. It's one of the things that the moderation team, whenever you see it, just go, yeah, this student has got properly involved with the project. It's something that is a no-brainer, it's easy to do, it's quick to do, it helps you to not just start the project in isolation, gives you a range of ideas beyond your own. It's really, really helpful and something that I strongly recommend. As I said, if you don't have someone who you can specifically say is the exact user, discuss it with someone else playing the role of a user. It's absolutely fine. It's not as good, but it's way better than nothing. As we've already mentioned, candidates focus on that single project, and then that limits the quality of what they're going to do, and they're obviously not going to be able to show problems, etc., and investigations as easily. They don't consider that there's marketability of the product, so we don't see anything that's showing us that they're really considering it. Have a subtitle that says marketability. Look at these things. Again, prove the problem. Find images of, screenshot images that there are that you're getting proof from a different source. Show me links to websites, URLs, YouTube videos, the Guardian newspaper, whatever it is that you need to do. Make sure it goes beyond your own experience and your own bubble. The last one is more for centres who are not St Brendan's students, and that's because some centres ask students to all start from the same starting point. If your teacher is asking you to do that, I would suggest you have a chat with them and say that that's not necessarily what you want to do, because it can really stifle what you're going to do. Okay, I'm not going to go through this in much detail. This is just for you guys to refer to, but it shows you the difference between lower marks bands and higher mark bands and the kind of options with it. So sticking with something that is safe is going to get you less marks than something that is going to challenge and push you, i.e. something you don't know, something that's beyond your scope of understanding. Making sure that the product is really connected to the contextual situation, the environment of use. Where is it used? What are the problems within that? An authentic approach, i.e. that it's all based on real information. It's not just made up. So, a limited study that says of 10 people who you found off the street and said, do you think there's a problem? What do you want to do? And they all come up with magically the scenario that you want, isn't necessarily a valid approach. What we're looking for here is we're looking for you to actually show there is proof and that the project is valid. Showing that you're going to build on your investigations, that you take them further, that you're really starting to think beyond and are all around the project from different directions rather than just from one single point of view. And also, as I say, using relevant data and statistics. So finding information from a range of sources that prove that there really is stuff. Reliable information is also something that you should be looking at. That can come from well-known websites. So if you've got a reliable newspaper, the Times, the Telegraph, or you're looking at something like the Guardian, or you're going to government websites to find statistics, particularly UK governments, what you're going to find is that generally those statistics are pretty valid and that the information there is a fairly reliable resource. However, if you're just coming up and looking through some really dodgy backwater website that doesn't look very professional, isn't based on a large company, you might get some very strange and very skewed ideas that things are the right way, but actually it's just someone's perception and all they're doing is putting stuff on the internet. So think about where your information is coming from. Here we've got the start of one of the projects of a previous student. Within it, you will notice that there are aspects which are SWOT analysis. So we've got strengths, we've got weaknesses, we've got opportunities here as well. We have a project which is actually about a prosthetic limb. However, this is the first one of their ideas, and this is actually on vertical farming. So you can see as they're doing a good amount of fleshing out of detail, they are quoting from places like the National Trust. We've got percentages popping up that are talking about how people are using or possibly using. We've got a range of links. Now, these links are really useful. They show us where information came from. They also allow us to then access sites if we want to check data or anything like that. From your point of view, if you start finding relevant information as you go through this process, just copy the URLs into your PowerPoint, just stick them in, and then that then means we can access it, as in when I say we, I mean the marker or the moderation team, if and when or should we need to. So direct observation is better than third-party observation here. So what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of stuff here which is done from the internet. That's not great. It would be better if there were actual photographs or a visit to somewhere where it proved that this problem was really existing, ideally in the student's local setting, because that makes it a stronger project. It shows they've engaged more fully with it and they understand it probably better. Stuff that just comes off the internet on its own, particularly if there are images in the products or aspects which the student could have engaged with themselves, always is a bit kind of, it's a missed opportunity rather than anything else. But this is a very good one. We look at a variety of different aspects. As I said, I'm not going to read it to you, but feel free to read through the information included on this slide by pausing the video, see the sort of things that were included for a project that then wasn't then selected. The same project then moves forwards. This is a second slide, probably from about 7. So bear that in mind. This is more of the prosthesis. Before this, there's been several other projects that have been looked at in a similar vein to the previous slide. And now we're starting to look in more depth and more detail. You'll notice here, this isn't just a SWOT analysis. It's not just strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. There's actually looking at things like function, USP, anthropometrics and ergonomics, the possible materials. There's lots of questions or opportunities that are being raised here. There's problems that with the product and what it needs to do as well. There's consideration of who the key stakeholders are, what they might want. We'll be covering feasibility and how to undergo this process in more detail in another video, so look out for that. However, and that video I'll link in the comments below this one. However, this is a really solid way of looking at the feasibility for the major project. Bits of it could be more fleshed out, arguably, but it's a really good quality in-depth where we're starting to identify what the key requirements are for the project, and we're really starting to get a feel for what the product has to be and has to do to be successful. And here's another one. So this is the entirety of another project. So bear in mind the last one I've just shown you was one of 7 slides. This was a slide which had the information within it. It also has the brief. So if you can spot that, you're doing well. This is a student who's getting it wrong, not doing the right things. What we've got a problem that the student is saying exists, but there's absolutely no proof really of that happening. There's a couple of links, but either they're very easy to miss. There's no photographic evidence that this problem really does exist beyond the student's perception. We've got some strengths and weaknesses. Fine. They're not very in depth. There's no proof that they really are actually factual. There's no detail of feasibility beyond what we're looking at here. This response is short, low level, superficial, and what we're looking at here is this is more of a mark band 2, low end mark band 2 response. It's got some aspects within it, but it really isn't hitting the higher marks. If you end up doing something that looks along these sort of lines rather than the slides you've already seen, you are not going about it in enough detail and you are not going to hit the higher marks. So, as I said, something else to watch is the assessing feasibility video, which I'll be putting up and linking in the comments below. After this one, if you already understand feasibility and you're totally happy with how to go about it and the information you've already seen above is very useful and you were able to make progress, then please do. The next video in the series will be on 1.2, which is the design brief and the user. Thanks for watching DT TV. Like and subscribe. Have a good day.